to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 40th episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is John Perkins and I've been in the bioanalytical LCMS space for over 26 years. I'm here with my co-host Dominic Orino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Orino and I've been in the LBA and cell-based assay space for a little over 27 years.
Dominic and I are senior scientific advisors at KCAS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS's services. Today we have a very special guest. As it's another milestone, we've invited John Bucksath, CEO of KCAS, back to join us for the main topic that Dom will describe later. Hi, John.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
I'm located in upstate New York, Dom and John are in Kansas, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we are all over the map. We're thrilled to have you listening to the 40th episode of this podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. As many of you know, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we started the podcast when COVID restrictions prevented us from continuing business as usual. We're unable to meet face to face, but we want to continue communicating with all of you. The podcast was an idea we've always had, but it suddenly became the perfect medium for us to employ. Today's podcast will be a review of the latest news and resources, and then a focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and give you a little teaser for the next episode, letting you know what is coming in the future. So again, we're fired up to have you here, and we're looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off for podcast number 40, Dom is going to go over today's podcast topic a bit before we jump into the news and resources section. Dominic.
Yeah, John, what an exciting day it is. It's podcast number 40. We've been doing this for a little over a year. Who would have thought we made a survive that long? But today we have a very special guest, CEO of KCAS, John Bucksath. As always, we'll go over our news and resources, and we'll talk about some topics related to COVID. Then we'll have a few non-COVID news items as well. And then we'll go into our main portion. And today's topic is trends in the pharma industry and what they mean for KCAS. And we got a few other items we'll go into. We'll drill into that, but it'll be an exciting episode talking about some, trends in the pharma industry, impacts of COVID, some of what's going on in the CRO market in general, and then some of the changes we've had at KCAS. So should be an exciting and jam-packed episode. I know, like John, I'm fired up as well. So without further ado, John, let's jump right into the news. And the first story is a COVID-related story where there's counterfeit Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine surfacing in Poland and Mexico. Seems like it's kind of like almost like a worldwide thing, but there was a clinic down in Mexico where 80 people apparently had paid about $1,000 per dose, but it turns out they were fake. It was actually distilled water and delivered in beach-style coolers. So just a really, John, I think it's just something that makes us all cringe a little bit when we think about how we're dealing with the pandemic, and then you have to factor in the potential of a fake vaccine. Also in this article, it says seems like there's ties to Poland, South Africa, Mexico, and even China and Zambia, where an additional 80 were arrested in China. I think the real take home is there's none in the U.S., right? So that's the good thing here is there's none in the U.S., although there was, right, John, something happened in Baltimore where somebody apparently back in February looked like they started Moderna. But this is just one of those stories where, I'm glad we have some policing in the world, or at least somebody's monitoring these things. And thankfully it seems to be pretty contained, but but doesn't surprise us, does it, John?
No, I mean, I think that's it. We've talked week after week about the good of this, where, obviously the acceleration of vaccines and therapeutics. We talk about collaboration between pharma companies to up manufacturing to get doses to market. But where there's demand, you're going to get other people trying to take advantage of it. And it's not just Pfizer. I mean, you got there was a private plane seized en route from Mexico to Honduras carrying 5,700 doses of the Sputnik 5 vaccine. You've got, actually, it's not just making fake doses, but you've also got people setting up websites that are supposedly selling on the vaccine, but only using it to harvest personal data. And it's not just it's websites, it's telemarketing calls, text messages, and door-to-door visits. So that's the kind of thing to watch for here. I think we haven't seen any fake doses in the US, but certainly people trying to steal your personal information is something to be very aware of. I mean, and looking back on this, there's been a history to this. The Pfizer thing was just the most recent case, but basically Interpol said, issued an alert across its 194 nation network warning of COVID related organized crime. I mean, the more you start thinking about it, it's really fascinating. I mean, what did they do to track down, for example, the group in Mexico who are administering distilled water doses? I'd love to spend a week with the agents who are following up on this stuff, because I think it'd be fascinating.
Yeah, John, I mean, I think this is sort of the modern day mafia, right? And this is what you're kind of describing there. They're kind of terrorizing people both virtually, and I think that's one degree of sort of criminal activity that will only continue to increase, right? They're not harming anybody with injecting things. They're just simply stealing information. So you got that to kind of think about. And then, of course, you're right. You wonder how many have been caught, and how many maybe people have been dosed with just a sham vaccine. And so it would be fascinating to sort of follow them. But to me, it's a new sort of criminal network is what's happening out there. And I suppose it's a shame that people are capitalizing on it.
I suppose the only upside is that in Poland, the actual vials contained anti-wrinkle treatments, so at least people's skin looked good afterward.
Yeah, I guess. I did read that. I think the downside here is we still have so many people that are resistant to getting vaccinated,
sure,
right?
Absolutely. I
don't know, we can go off topic a little bit, but so many, what's the US at? We've got 105 million or something that have both doses, and maybe 150 that have one or something, 50 more million. But that's still very low, and it's really dropping, right? People are dropping, and it's these types of stories that we want to emphasize. This is just, put this aside. You go get vaccinated, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I read this morning that someone, I don't know the background of it, someone said that they'd read that it was only 9% more adults who hadn't been vaccinated intended to get vaccinated, and that will only take the US to somewhere above 50%. And we've been talking for quite a way through this pandemic that herd immunity is between 70 and 90%, so we're well short of that. I suppose the only other optimistic piece is that there's Canada authorized the Pfizer vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds, and it's likely that the US will follow that. So that will be another pocket of population to help us move towards that herd immunity, because in previous calculations, younger people were excluded because there was no authorization for vaccine for use with them. So there is that will help.
Pulling out all the stops. I think
that's what you have to do. Absolutely, yeah. I totally. I'll back up your message. Get vaccinated if you can. If you haven't done it already, get vaccinated. And because we're seeing infection rates drop in countries that have got better rates. It's happening in the UK. It's happening here. It's happened in Israel. And we really need other countries to catch up and get their vaccine rollouts moving as well. And I'm sure we'll revisit that on an ongoing basis. Let's move on.
One last thing. Budweiser is giving away free beer to those who can come in and show they're vaccinated. I don't know if you saw that. So there is, if you are vaccinated, you can get a free Budweiser. That's the latest sort of, kind of incentive that I've seen. And I think you'll see more and more restaurants and everything saying, hey, if you've been vaccinated, get a free something. And I think that's a good message. I hope that works. So, but yeah, John, let's go on to the next, because I'm excited to talk about the non-COVID. We're going to discuss something we got one here too, but go ahead and talk about the next COVID.
We got one more COVID piece, and it's quite a meaty topic because it's scientifically very interesting. This is about Vox did an article on the UK recovery trial for COVID-19 treatments, and they think by calculations so far it's helped save 1 million lives with its dexamethasone study. I'll give a bit of background here. The UK's pandemic response really hasn't been good. They've suffered amongst the most cases or deaths per capita across the globe. But like I mentioned a minute ago, they are actually turning things around with vaccination. One thing that has been a huge success in the UK is this recovery trial, and it's really come out of two researchers in the University of Oxford, and what they did. Going back to the early days of COVID, we knew that vaccines and therapeutics were likely to be the route out of this, particularly vaccines. But it's a case of were there any medicines out there that could be repurposed to help patients until vaccines were available. And of course, in the early days, we were still thinking in terms of a vaccine taking multiple years, because the previous quickest vaccine had been 6-7 years to market. So we weren't thinking of having a vaccine in a year, even though everyone was saying it's going to be accelerated. So the recovery trial basically. It actually is rooted back in the 80s, and really looking at cardiac medicine. There's actually a group of Oxford scholars weren't happy with lack of treatment for heart attacks, and so they came up with a trial where they could test different therapeutics. So they actually recruited a bunch of hospitals, and they set the system up where if a patient was admitted to hospital, they would be administered to a treatment arm when they'd either get a treatment or placebo, and then the hospital staff all had to report whether the patient lived or died, if they'd had something like a blood clot or stroke. And the reason why we mention that is actually one of the medications that came out that was aspirin. So aspirin that we'd always taken for headaches was through this trial was identified as helpful in terms of intervention with heart attacks. And that where they intended to start with like tens of thousands of patients, the trial actually went to 140,000 patients. So when it came to COVID, they thought they could do the same, and actually it was two Oxford academics who came together. One guy had the protocols set up for multi-drug investigation, and the other one was thinking about how to set up such a massive trial in the UK, because no one had ever done this in a pandemic situation. So so just to cut a long story short, more than 175 hospitals came on board in the UK. They basically went in the end through nine treatments, identified dexamethasone as one of the main as a drug that would prevent death and reduce mortality for seriously ill COVID-19 patients. And they've actually also identified that tocilizumab shows the same thing, and they've rejected a bunch of others, including hydroxychloroquine and convalescent plasma. And it's an endorsement of the UK's National Health Service in terms of that network, how they could pull in a large group of people to collaborate on this. And it's just an interesting article, and I'm sure that if we have future pandemics like this, the same approach will be rolled out.
Yeah, John, it's fascinating. Like you said, 175 hospitals, over 35,000 patients in a pretty short period of time. They're literally, as people were walking into the hospital, they had like big billboards saying, "Oh, do you want to sign up for this enrollment?" And a lot of people took it. And like you said, there was 9 different treatments. I would love to see some data. Yep. I think it would be astronomical to look at some of this, but it does. I think it is a testament to the British health system. They did a great job of there's some risks in here. The story talks about how a lot of people were saying, look, dexamethasone is not going to work. And then,
I was going to touch on that too.
Yeah. And so just the whole, I think there's a lot of courage in here comes to mind with these two individuals, Horby and Landry. I think I'm Landry, right? So they're both should be kind of applauded and probably saved, significant amounts of lives, John. And certainly, dexamethasone appeared early on and almost seemed a little too simple to be such a powerful combatant to COVID, right? So great read, John. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that, obviously there was a lot of trials were rolled out early on, but so many were rejected because they weren't either big enough or well designed enough, and this has really become the authoritative trial. I mean, I think there is definitely the case of, because it's looking at a large population, it can really identify sub-pockets of populations who may benefit from a treatment. It's very much a broad stroke approach, but still in its approach is immensely valuable.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Sometimes broad strokes what you want, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that was part of the reason why the therapeutic, they were like, oh, well, can I give this to a 70-year-old diabetic? And it's like, gee, I don't know, but dexamethasone, you certainly can, right? That's
and
no
I
issue.
I think it is worth just touching on the dexamethasone. I'll just basically, it said from the article, dexamethasone was an educated guess. There's limited research available on the drug and viral infections. Some of it showed the drug could be helpful, but there are also indications it could be dangerous at high doses. Nobody knew for sure it would work. So prominent experts warned against testing dexamethasone, Horby and Landry say, because of potential adverse effects made it unethical. But they saw it differently because there was already an existing proposal set up a steroid trial whenever the next flu pandemic happened. So you're right, there was some courage saying, we think this is going to work. It's we don't know, but we think this is going to work. Lo and behold, it did. And the final takeaway is actually, even for drugs that are coming through, there's that struggle to get recruits on board. And so there's some partnerships with drug companies. They cited Regeneron, who are actually getting their investigative therapeutics into the recovery trial. And Regeneron have got an antibody cocktail that they basically started working on last September, with results come out in the next few months or so. So there's obviously, like, researchers definitely see the benefit of this kind of trial.
John, there's a lot of therapeutics making headway, not just the Regeneron. We'll talk about that maybe in a future podcast. There are some interesting emerging ones. Maybe I think I'll just leave it with, or we can leave it with, this is, I think, the pandemic itself is like history to me. As I sat here, I'm like, this would be a fascinating thing if I'm going to maybe talk to even my son. I think as you get into college, this will be something that people will be studying for years to come, John. I think this is like, you kind of learned about the Spanish flu, right?
Yep.
Or the Black Plague. This is going to be something that propels science. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is propelling our industry quite significantly, and it makes me feel warm inside.
Yeah, it's turned a lot of our assumptions on their head. Like I said about the vaccines expectation, our previous expectation was multiple years to market, but we had one authorized for use within, was it 8 months or so? I mean,
about 9. Yeah.
I mean, that's really. But that's not the only thing. There's all this, like, everything we talk about. There's the cooperation between, pharma companies. That this is a learning experience. They have this trial approach that they know they can do it. There's going to be so many things that will change how we function going forward.
I think so. I think it'll give more I don't know if leniency is the right word, or loosen the restrictions, but I just think this is all moving us in the right direction. But John, we're going to move off of COVID and talk about one of my favorite cytokines in the world, John. This is another meaty article. There's tons of information on it, and it was like, we were going to talk about this last time, but it was just, if we'd done that, we wouldn't have given it enough time. So basically, this is talking about how the challenge with drug design. And what companies can do to address that. This is in the large molecule side of things, and the headline is basically, IL2 treatment can be dangerous. Here's how drug firms are trying to fix it. Another long article with plenty to read, but really, really good, and I learned a ton. John, let me I'd like to do one thing.
Let you roll with it, because and I may chime in, but if you want to take the stand, feel free.
No, I'm going to give a little bit of I'm going to try and condense 30 or 40 years of IL-2 treatment in a couple blurps, and then you can kind of dive into the article. But if you're not familiar with interleukin-2, it originally was discovered and isolated back in, I think, the late 80s. And when you would take peripheral blood mononuclear cells and put a drop of IL-2 in there, the T cells would scatter about. So its originally name was T cell scatter factor. That's what it was called because they would become so active, almost violently in the tissue culture cell. These T cells would go crazy. So that was originally, it was called the T cell scatter factor because they didn't know what it was doing. But IL-2 is a very potent T cell proliferative cytokine, and it has a lot of downstream effects, a lot of what's called autocrine and paracrine. So T cells will make it and consume it, so they kind of beef up and then they can divide and conquer. So just to set the tonality of it. And then I had the good fortune of working with a guy by the name of Michael Lotz, and he was an MD at NIH back in the late 90s and 80s. And he worked with a guy by the name of Michael Rosenberg, and they were dosing IL-2 into patients. They were some of the original people to do this. And yes, there's, as the article says, I'll let you jump in, John, but I got a nice lineage there.
Go ahead.
I've studied IL-2, been studying T cells my whole life. Yep. So it's something that I got a lot of passion for. And so when they were treating people, they did notice it's not too different from a CAR T cell sort of. The people would get a cytokine storm, and if you could live through the storm, you'd have efficacy. And so that's what the article talks about. It had been about 15% effective, but it had this unfortunate side effect, which is kind of a high death rate. But then again, there's a lot of cancer patients. They were near their end. They were treating like late stage cancer patients. So back to this article, John, now there's still a lot of movement in IL-2, and they're trying to find ways to make it longer lasting. They're trying to find ways to diminish the immunogenicity of it. They're doing all sorts of technologies. And that's where it's still been something that's researched for years. And even I'll say here at KCAS, we've worked on a number of IL-2 compounds in our history and really done a whole bunch of either PK analysis and some pharmacodynamics on it. But it's a really good kind of a testament to how far we've come, because I think we're getting closer to maybe having it to the state where it can be the powerful therapeutic we are. And maybe in the next few years, some of these companies that are in this article will break through. So, John, I'll stop there and let you go over the article.
I'm going to give my layman's thing on this because, this is the take home for me. Basically, you had an early approved drug of Proleukin, which is a therapeutic version of IL-2. The issue was that it had a short half-life, so it started to disappear almost immediately. And so then it was a case of had to be administered at high doses every few hours. So then people couldn't tolerate dosing, they were getting side effects, and then you got the concern about antibodies reducing efficacy. So that's why the focus is on this, increasing the half-life of the drug, so you can spread out the dosing and maintain its effectiveness. So that's why a lot of the focus is in that direction.
Yeah, John. In this article, there's a quote from an individual by the name of Carl Walke, and I know Carl, and he says IL-2 has these funny geometries. It bends and twists in funny ways. That's not good for bioanalytical, by the way, and it also makes it quite challenging. But it's such a powerful cytokine, and what they've done to stabilize it, people put pegs on there. They've even got really creative to sort of make as you said, it takes a lot. So the challenge with IL-2 is that it has this short half-life. It gets consumed quickly. So what they've done is they've found ways to stabilize the IL-2, but also litter it with like maybe 4 IL-2s and like some sort of branching of it. They've got very creative so that you can deliver a more potent dose of it in a stable format. So it's great, and I wish them well. They've certainly come a long way in terms of there's no more severe or even death related with IL-2. I think it's come a long way in terms of its safety, but it's just a great makes me feel warm and fuzzy, or maybe even a little bit old, to be thinking about how studying IL-2 back in the early 90s, and here we are in 2021 still chugging along and looking at IL-2, which, by the way, I think the vast majority of gene therapy, cellular therapies, anything that's affecting Immuno Oncology that is efficacious has an IL-2 production to it that can never be monitored because of that autocrine paracrine system that I talked about. So you might stimulate somebody and they produce a bucket load of IL-2, but it's just absorbed right back up. And if it is if you produce too much of it, that's when you're susceptible to like that septic shock that people go in. So anyhow, John, it's something that I love near and dear, and I'm thrilled that we're talking about it.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I mean, some of the things that are done. You said there's the change in amino acids to strengthen or weaken interactions between IL2 and various receptors. You talked about pegylating, coupling IL2 to antibodies, actually figuring out mimics, which are they recreate IL2's function but without the half-life and toxicity issues. So yeah, there's a lot of companies in this area. Pandion Therapeutics are working with Roche, Synthorix, Bright Peak Therapeutics, Nectar and Neoleukin. And just as a final note, and I know you're excited about it, but Nicolaus Shurakis, a researcher at University of Pennsylvania, his quote is basically, the way things are changing, he thinks the field is coming of age, so it's watch this space.
Yeah, maybe. And you touched on a lot there. Knocking out a few little amino acids will make it less immunogenic. That's some great in silico artificial intelligence helps with that. And then in general, IL2 is something that has this, how do I say it, like home run effect to it, that I feel like the industry is really getting into a place where this is going to be, I think, in our lifetime, potentially one of the biggest breakthroughs in immuno oncology, right up there with CAR T cells and CRISPR. This is on its way. It's going to be great.
So let's move on. Another topic that is this should be a reasonably quick one, but we talk a lot about drug discovery. Sorry, not drug discovery. We talk a lot of drug delivery, and this was an article about a company called Lindra, who have an interesting approach to small molecule therapeutics, and they're basically interested in ultra long acting regimens, and it's all down. It's a capsule based system. It's all down to the design of the capsule. So basically, the patient swallows the pill, it gets into the stomach, the outer capsule dissolves, and then the pill opens up to a star shape in the stomach, which then prevents the pill from being passed, so it stays in the stomach for a predetermined time, such as a week or month, all the time releasing the drug. And this is interesting, because I mean, they talked about this was actually in the case of a phase 2 for schizophrenia drug, and what the Lindra's theory in this case is, by having this long-acting delivery, they're avoiding the highs and lows of a typical PK profile. So that high spike, and then it declines before you then have the next dose. But also there's other drugs that they're looking at, a whole raft of therapeutics, and it's also the case of, if you have something you take once a week, it takes away that erratic nature of taking a pill once a day. I mean, I know that I'm on a once a pill day, and sometimes you forget, or you get to late in the day and you think, did I take such and such? Because you don't always take it at the same time, and so this sort of removes some of that erratic nature of self-administering drugs. So it just another interesting application of drug delivery.
Yeah, John, it's fascinating the way chemists are so clever in the design. You touched on it, where like, okay, so making something that dissolves slowly, that's all fine. That's some technology that's been around, but to have it pop open in a star shape, so that literally almost becomes like an implant, John, like an insulin implant on you. So that's really cool technology. And you touched on schizophrenia, but this has high upside for things like cholesterol, and I would imagine even some oral diabetics they mentioned they're getting into, and I can only imagine it would get into maybe the heart area as well. So John, Lindra is a fascinating company. They're on their way. Good for them with their advancement in some small molecule delivery systems, which of course, John, is stimulating talk for you and I. John, the next article here. Well, John, I'm gonna punt it over to you, because it talks about malaria, and you love Madagascar, and so why don't you tell us what's happening?
I mean, we talk about COVID vaccines all the time, but this could be a real game changer. In the Oxford and Novaks are 75.
Yeah, maybe I'll actually travel to Africa, John, if they can make this work. Maybe I'll get the courage to go there. I don't know if you knew that about me. I'm a little scared of traveling like that, John. Did you know that?
Well, I mean, I think. Well, obviously, when we went, we had to take malaria tablets. We either took chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. I'm not sure which one of the two. Anyway, the headline is Oxford and Novavax tout 75% plus efficacy for malaria vaccine, besting GlaxoSmithKline in long hunt to inoculate against deadly parasite. I'm going to start with actually GlaxoSmithKline because they actually have a vaccine, Mosquirix, that was approved in Europe, but it only shows 35 to 55% efficacy. And they're rolling out pilot studies in Africa, but that really isn't enough to meet WHO guidelines who are asking for the 75%. Now, when we say about Oxford and Novavax have tout this malaria vaccine, they've actually adapted the GSK approach. The GSK, it was a guy called Joe Cohen invented Mosquirix, which is the GSK vaccine. It targeted the protein on spores that mosquitoes inject into the body, fused that malaria protein with the hepatitis B protein, and the issue that you have is that the ratio of malaria protein to hepatitis B protein isn't. It's out of whack, where there's much more hepatitis B protein than malaria protein, which is why it's limited access and lower efficacy. So the work at Oxford is really how do we switch that around so that you get more malaria protein versus the hepatitis B protein. And the reason why this is so important, I mean, we're all dealing with COVID this year, and which obviously is a huge deal. We've obviously millions have died worldwide, but in every year malaria kills more than 400,000 people, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is every year that we have to deal with this. So to have something that could possibly eradicate malaria is just huge, and that's why I wanted to have this as a news item, because it's just if this really is moving forward, then this could be astonishing for Africa, and like you say, Dom, possibly travel for you. I mean, certainly from my perspective, I did the Madagascar trip. That was a quick one off. I'd really like to go to Kenya with my wife, because her parents lived in Kenya for a while, so to actually visit where they lived and worked would be fantastic. So we're always thinking about that sort of thing, where we want to go next, but that to have this vaccine available, I'd be first in line for that one.
Yeah. No, I think, John, you mentioned, actually, sidebar, my wife and I are thinking more and more about a Saharan or some sort of African sort of trip. And I would roll my sleeve up for this vaccine in a heartbeat. I don't know how much people know about malaria, but it is carried through mosquitoes, which was want to talk about a fascinating case study in history. The people who figured that out, I forget their names, but that was an amazing find, and it's really saved millions and millions of lives just knowing that, right? Like a simple mosquito net has saved millions of lives in Africa, maybe more. And so to have something, and it's been evasive because of that. It's hard to study something that goes into an organism and gets passed from the mosquito to you. And so they've really taken advantage of it. Again, these scientists are great. This Joe Cohen with this Mosquirix is fascinating. And then, what immediately popped into my mind is like, wow, are we going to have some mRNAs? Is that even possible? But I think it would be challenging due to some of the evasiveness and how quickly the malaria. It's not really, again, I'm not that brushed up on it. I studied it a long time ago in terms of the life cycle of malaria. There's only a small window where you could actually maybe dismantle it, is how I think of it, or destroy it in the insect. But anyhow, John, great read.
And this does bring us full circle to something we were talking about earlier, and the change, how COVID-19 affects drug development, because the Jenner Institute are talking that they might apply for emergency use or authorization for this vaccine, which is, we've never done that for a vaccine of this kind of nature. But as the researchers at Oxford said, this kills so many people a year. Why wouldn't you use for EUA? Whereas you got other researchers saying, well, actually, we'd prefer, to see more safety and efficacy data, because there is a phase 3 study planned. And just to finally say where the data came from, the phase 2 study was 7% effective at preventing malaria in a trial of 450 children in Burkina Faso. So it is quite a small trial, but it's still hugely optimistic, at least on the
Yeah,
basis
it's
of what we've
great.
seen so far.
It's just amazing, John, to think that something as unfortunate as COVID will trigger all these wonderful advancements in science, because it does appear that it's given a lot more discussion around it, and I think it's given some leniency is the word that comes to mind when you start thinking about, hey, wait a minute, hey, for COVID we did this because we had so many deaths that were occurring, but look at this disorder that's killing way more people. Why are we so conservative, right? So
Yep.
it's great, it's wonderful. But John, we've got a very great podcast ahead of us. We got a great agenda today. And without further ado, John, maybe we'll move on to our main portion. And we have a guest speaker with us who is near and dear to both of us and everybody at KCAS. We have the great pleasure of having John Bucksath, the CEO of KCAS, join us, as he mentioned earlier in the introduction. And so, John Perkins, maybe why don't you go over the agenda, and then we can kick off the main portion.
Sure. I mean, so actually this podcast should have happened last week when I was over in Kansas for a groundbreaking ceremony on our new facility. But obviously we all got busy and we pushed it off a week. But in between then and now, we thought it would be good to talk about trends in the pharma industry and what they mean for KCAS, particularly in view of the fact that, like say, we've broken ground on a new building, and we talked about new investors coming on board with the company in our last podcast. So that really is the main topic. We thought, in terms of the company, the best person to talk about trends in the pharma industry and how it may impact us is really John Bucksath, and it's a pleasure to welcome him back, having had him on a previous episode. So John, I think let's start on where do you see. Well, first of all, let's give you an opportunity to just say hello and introduce yourself, and we'll move into the topics from here.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me back on the podcast again. It's been fantastic to see the evolution of what you two gentlemen continue to host here, and again, more than happy to be a part of it. A little bit of background about myself. I've been in the industry for over 30 plus years, all of it in the CRO industry, but my background actually started out as a chemist and eventually moved into the business management aspects of the CRO industry. Worked at 2 or 3 different organizations over time, but here obviously most recently the last 5 years have been at KCAS, and been just very fortunate to work with this team and be in a position to help move the company forward and attract fantastic talent here in the Kansas City area. And we've just had an incredible run so far, and that run with what's going on out in the industry, it looks like it's going to continue, but not only continue but accelerate. And I think that's a good jump off point, if you will. We'll talk about the trends in the pharma industry. And sometimes maybe we'll differentiate that a little bit by including the biotech aspects of that. I think first and foremost, particularly if you're a service-based organization, you tend to look at the R&D aspects and the funding that's going into that. And particularly in the last year or so, there's been almost continuous year-over-year records set in the funding going into the industry. That's obviously a good sign for the demand to come for the CROs that are out there, and the CDMOs and all the service-based organizations that support these companies in the development of their products. I think what's also interesting is just the rapid onset of kind of some explosion in certain areas. And while there's a lot to talk about, I guess really the one that really seems to be really gravitating towards the most acceleration is really cell and gene therapy at this point in time. It seems like it came out of nowhere, but the reality is cell and gene therapy has been around for a while. It's just now getting to the point where I believe we have the technology, the expertise, and the focus to find that it's a market-rich environment, and a lot of folks are starting to capitalize on that technology and the ability to really understand these very complex therapeutics as they start to develop these, particularly around unmet needs. And I think that's where a lot of the market is going. And I think really starts to kind of set a tone for, we've all heard the term personalized medicine. While this is not necessarily personalized medicine, it's definitely a big step towards that, as a lot of these products are geared towards rare and sometimes orphan diseases. So I think that's an area to watch. You can't hardly look in the industry at all without seeing cell and gene therapy being mentioned in the news in some form or fashion. So I really believe that's an incredible technology leap. Again, it's been around for a while, but we really do have the ability to try to accelerate that. And I'm very curious to see where this will go and what impact it will have on the industry at this point.
Yeah, John, I think you said that well. I mean, cell and gene therapies, as you know, they're not new. They've been around since the late 80s and 90s, having worked on some in the 90s, but it was more black box back then. It was just sort of, I don't want to, maybe the wild, wild west, but we didn't really fully understand some of what we were doing. And now it's become very targeted, very specific, flash forward 30 years now, and it's wonderful. So John, thanks for that sort of trends in the pharma industry start. As we're looking at this agenda here, maybe we'll roll into what is the impact that COVID has had on the industry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
If I just say one thing, I mean, it's fascinating for me to watch how rapidly things are changing. I come at this from a very much a small molecule perspective because I came into this with an LCMS background. I've never been in a pharma company, but to just in the course of the last year doing this podcast, we're doing news items, and I'm learning, so much more about these different therapeutic approaches, but also how much people are thinking about. We talked about the IL2s, where there's a therapeutic. We know it can be a therapeutic effect, but there's other things to counter. But there's so many groups researching it to try and counter it, and obviously it's really, really pushing the field forward at a rapid rate. It's just amazing to watch.
It is an interesting area, not only just from the technology aspect, but one of the challenges as these compounds explode on the scene. Today, there's really not a well-defined regulatory pathway.
Sure.
So not only are we developing this technology, in concert with that, we're also trying to figure out, what are those next steps from the guidelines, the guidelines and regulatory requirements for small molecules and proteins have all, really starting to mature or have matured in the case of small molecule. But yet here we are getting to see yet another area, and the complexities are really challenging the scientists and the regulators to figure out what that looks like.
Sure.
Now today, obviously, they expect us to follow good quality practices, but I'm hoping that KCAS, with some of the investments we're making here and some of the expertise that we just recently brought on, that we can play a part in that, not only on the technology side and supporting our client, but also in the aspects of getting involved and really trying to help and influence, the regulatory aspects so we can produce these drugs more reliable and safely, and really kind of see this area bloom into, particularly as it's meeting a lot of patients' unmet needs.
Yeah, and John, we're, for the sake of time, we'll move on. But what you're touching on is a whole nother podcast topic, because there's no real pharmacokinetics for most of these cell and gene therapies. It's all pharmacodynamic measurements, and that gets really, really, really complex for a regulator to try to evaluate, and not only that, the innovator to do some sort of bioanalytical work. But with that, John, we got a lot to unpack here. I think if it's okay with you, we'll move on to that next topic. We're going to switch gears a little bit. I think the trends in pharma industry, that's great. But one of the things that's impacted it, obviously, is COVID. And I know you've got a lot to talk about here. Why don't you tell us the impact of COVID on the industry and some of what's happening there?
Absolutely. Well, from the perspective that I'll take today is really sitting in my chair from the CRO industry. Obviously, COVID has been a major burden on the global society that we live in. But I do think if we could find any type of silver lining in COVID, I think to some extent it's really helped the world, and particularly here in the U.S., really kind of help educate a lot of the population on really what the industry does. And if nothing else, if we can try to, we always talk about the negatives of COVID, but maybe for this period of time, we'll talk about maybe some positive things that come out of it. Well, I just mentioned one, right? I think that the population here in the U.S. as a whole has a better understanding of product development or drug development. And to some extent, the industry wasn't in a favored state before COVID. And I think with Operation Warp Speed and some of those aspects, we're seeing the industry in a more favorable light, being able to deliver a vaccine in record time. I think that the pharma and biotech industries today are looked upon in a more favorable light than they were. The other aspect of that, just purely from the business perspective, while it's been terrible, the impact that COVID has had on such industries as the travel industry and entertainment industry, I do think investors have looked for other areas to invest. And I think, quite frankly, the biotech and pharmaceutical companies have been the benefactor of that.
If I could just add one more thing, I think also what we've seen all the way through this is that pharma companies have learned how to do things better as well, and COVID-19 really has triggered that. We've seen it's going to change how trials are run, and how drugs are developed, etc., to move things quicker. I think we've all learned.
Yeah, it's a roadmap for future drugs, right? I think that's part of it too. Like this is now what the warp speed. But go ahead, John. Perkins? I think we touched on that. Maybe the next item.
That was it. That was all I had to say. I just thought.
Yeah, no. Then if we can, we've got a couple more agenda items, and of course, we're just thrilled that we've got you here, John. So tell us a little bit more. You touched on COVID in the industry, but in general, and this is a big one, the CRO market and sort of where it's going, some mergers and things of that nature, because you hit something that I don't know if our audience was aware of. You said one of the, our industry is really kind of booming and benefiting from this because of some of those other industries like travel and so forth. There's not as much investment. It's all kind of to some degree pouring in. So I'm sure your head's spinning daily with some of the mergers. I know mine is, John. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. It's a very, very active space right now. But yeah, I mean, with the complexity of the R&D process, and again, some of the things we were just talking about, right? The kind of explosion of cell and gene therapy, there's still, while it seems like small molecule today isn't getting a ton of limelight, the reality is there's still more small molecule products developed than any other. So the pipelines, if you will, are expanding, they're growing. And because of that, the ability to serve your clients better and be able to do that in a global fashion, which is also becoming more in favor of what clients are looking for as they think about commercializing their products. There really is a demand on the CRO industry to expand and really not only be experts at what they do, but can they really partner with their clients and kind of get them through the development phase and make it easier for them to pick a partner that can do that. So with that said, we're seeing a tremendous amount of acquisitions happening, and those really are going for capacity as well as scale, geographical reach, and in some cases really moving up or downstream in the development pipeline. And there's a lot of argument for that they can continue to create value not only for their shareholders but for their clients. So there really is a pressure on CROs to continue to expand their expertise so that they really can serve their clients through that development phase, that, whatever their strategy is in that case, to continue to support their strategy moving forward. But where the market is going, it's interesting. We're also seeing a tremendous amount of startup CROs, particularly around the cell and gene therapy space. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see this new crop of CROs come and develop and grow, and what impact it will have on the industry.
Yeah, it's fascinating, John. I think we haven't even talked about Immuno Oncology, which is exploding as well, right? So there's just so many kind of areas that are, really popping, and it is almost daily. I think, I don't know if it's one merger that I think certainly struck us was PPD being purchased by Thermo. Any thoughts on that, or we can move on to the next item if that's easier.
For me, that one has me kind of, scratching my head a little bit. You've got these two mega CROs coming together. I honestly, I'm kind of on the fence as to an opinion on that. We've also seen another major merger in the form of Icon and PRA. So it's going to be really interesting to see some of these, multi-billion-dollar organizations come together in that fashion. So, and then, we've seen some of those go before us, in the form of LabCorp and Covance. So I don't know. I think sometimes they're so big and, that time to really kind of advance their strategy kind of blends in over time. So I really don't have a perspective on that. We're more
Yeah.
focused on this
I
environment.
Yeah, well, I think it was at least we won't spend too much more time on this, but the Icon purchasing of PRA had that made some sense to us.
It does.
The Thermo one, man, they're that really Thermo had purchased, as you know, Life Science, Goodco. They were major sort of reagents, and
Yeah.
they've got instruments, and they do have services now. They had some they're making proteins, and I know they have like ELISA kits and things, so they might even have. But to see them go out and get like a 500-pound gorilla in the CRO space was a left turn that was unexpected, I think, for the majority of us.
Yeah, I agree.
Thermo actually does have a significant amount of laboratory and to some extent even manufacturing capacity that tends to go under the radar. It's not as prevalent here in the U.S., but I do know that over in the EU, at least once upon a time, they had significant capacity there. So I think maybe in this attempt to become the proverbial one-stop shop, this arguably could have been that by purchasing PPD. But in that regard, Thermo is continuing to invest. We just don't hear much out of them. They don't market it like maybe most do, and I think maybe that goes under the radar at times.
Makes sense. John Perkins, I thought you had something to add there before we go on to the next topic.
I was going to say it, but I think I didn't really have much to add. But I do actually, just as an aside, one of the people I did my degree with at Reading is actually a COO at Thermo. Maybe I should get in touch with him and see if he could give me some perspective on that particular merger. It's something I'm overdue doing anyway,
Well, maybe even a guess. That would be great.
I've noodled with that one around in my head for a long time, thinking, could we get someone like that onto the podcast? Because it would be really interesting. But I haven't spoken to him in about 30 years, so that might be a bit of a stretch.
Well, you're a memorable guy, John. He'll know you. So with that, the next topic here is John, we got the investment community viewpoint. You kind of talked about that a little bit, but why don't you maybe just drill down a little bit deeper on investment community viewpoint and some of what you're learning and seeing?
Sure, absolutely. Well, from that perspective, there is a tremendous amount of interest in the space right now. When I mentioned earlier that there's a significant amount of investment, not only into the biotech industry, but also, an anticipated record number of IPOs coming out this year. Those that focus in the service industry realize that development capital, if you will, needs to be deployed and products need to be developed. So for us that are in the services business, there is a significant amount of interest. And for those that really can, demonstrate they can differentiate themselves and grow the organization, support their clients, there's ample amount of interest from not only strategics, but private equity groups alike at this point in time. In fact, KCAS was very fortunate recently to be able to take advantage of the market situation. And we have recently been acquired by a group called Vitruvian, and we're very thrilled to be working with them as a new capital partner. And we're just really excited about being able to continue our growth and our investment to serve the opportunities and the clients that we see out there and really help, at the end of the day, still help bring life-saving products to the market.
Yeah, John, I think what struck me as you were talking is if you could have gone back and say April of 2020, would you have ever thought there'd be a record number of IPOs set in 2021, right? Like that. I think then there was so much uncertainty, and now to see a record number, that just baffles the mind, right?
It really does. The first reaction was, oh boy, here we go again. It's going to be like another 2008, or this is really going to impact the markets. But again, in this case, it's a fortunate situation that we're in this market, and the ongoing demand for products that improve the quality of life and save life, has definitely prevailed in this case. So very fortunate that we're in this situation. But yes, Dominic, if I was betting back April 2020 that we'd be sitting here having this kind of discussion about record demand and record investment, I think I would have walked away with a little less money in my pocket.
Yeah, well, I think we were all bracing for them. My goodness, clinical trials are shutting down. And then suddenly what happened was, because of all the shutdowns, laboratories still had to carry on. And we saw really a big bolus of work come in early on, and that surprised us. So, and then we know clinical trials are starting to ramp back up, and we're feeling that as well.
Yeah,
but John Perkins, go ahead.
I was going to ask on that because I'm not key to it. But John, do you have any sense of how clinical trials are doing in terms of coming back up to where they were?
I don't have that right off the top of my head. However, I did see a well put together article, and I forget where it was at, but it was talking about just that, of how many that were shut down or stopped or delayed, and then the relatively difference between the time before it had started and how much of that's come back. And particularly, this was probably about a month ago when I read that article. I was pleasantly surprised at how much has been restarted or continued in that regard. But don't hold me to this, but I thought basically in a nutshell, we're somewhere around between 10 and 15% from being back at that pre-pandemic level.
Yeah.
I think we're going to skyrocket past it too. I think
Sure.
That'll go flying by it. So, we got one last topic, and this is one that's near and dear to everybody on the call here, right, or on our podcast. So, John, last item is tell us a little bit about some recent changes at KCAS, and there's been some. It's just been a wonderful ride to ride in your wake, so to speak, John. We're enjoying it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some future impact at KCAS?
Well, I do have the pleasure of serving as the CEO for the organization, and working with an incredible, talented team. A big portion of that's sitting right here on this podcast today. So, but with that in mind, yes, with the opportunity and the support from our investors, and continued focus on where the market is going, and quite frankly, hearing from our clients and how much they enjoy the work that we do and how we're really supporting them. There's actually a tremendous amount of pressure to grow the organization, to keep up, if you will, and the opportunities there. So from my perspective, my job is to create the resources and the systems and help recruit the talent that help continue to further KCAS, and again, helping our clients develop those products. What does that roll in? What does that consist of in this case? Well, one of the things that we have to do is have the capacity to do that. So one of the things that I think was mentioned earlier was that we have just broken ground on an approximate 70,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility that about this time next year we'll be enjoying and be able to really kind of continue the advance of our expertise in serving our clients. We're adding different service lines and capabilities and techniques, all of that coming out, and it's probably there's not even beginning to be near enough time to go into that, but continue to advance our platforms in mass spec and LBA, and then really kind of a significant commitment into the cell and gene therapy space here over the next several months. So definitely looking forward to really being able to put that together. I think that's what makes KCAS unique, in that we have a lot of these services co-located. We have expertise in all of these areas and sit across the table and debate and really put some perspective on the development with our clients' needs. There's been oftentimes, I've seen you two gentlemen debate with clients and really help convince them that maybe the process they were thinking about moving forward with was not the best option for their development. And after getting to see that come full circle has been absolutely just incredibly rewarding for not only the client, but for us as an organization. So I really do think that's really what differentiates KCAS. To do that, we need to continue to find the talent, and we've been hiring talent as quickly and as effectively as we can to bring on additional technical leadership and talent and capacity. And then, of course, the systems that support that team. So we're proud to say that we're bringing on a brand new state-of-the-art electronic quality management system, an ERP system, in addition to supporting that facility, to add to already the incredible investments we made at this point. So we really are setting ourselves up to grow and grow well and support our clients in their development needs.
Yeah, it was really interesting to be back last week. So it was my first trip to Kansas in over a year, and just how full the car park was compared to how it was a year ago. I mean, it was when I would come in to visit the lab, I knew where the parking spaces were likely to be. This time, those were gone. You're moving much further away from the lab to actually then go into the building. So you can see that just in the car park, you can see the way things have progressed in the last 12 months or so. And in terms of the new facility, John, you talk about 70,000 square feet. What is that compared to the size of facility that we're in right now, to give people an idea of the extent of change?
Great question, John. The actual physical space is a little bit more than double, but more importantly, the new modern design will actually increase efficiency on that as well. So having the opportunity to really design it from the ground up, and being fortunate enough to have designed 3 or 4 facilities over my career, you take a lot of those lessons learned and be able to incorporate it into a facility. So I think really from a capacity standpoint, while it's a little bit more than double actually from a capacity standpoint and design standpoint, we should be able to see somewhere in that neighborhood of almost a 3-fold increase in capacity.
Wow.
And we have the ability to expand on that facility if we need it.
We do. One of those lesson learned ideas is we do have the facility set up so that we could immediately, in fact, it's already designed into the design that we have today, when the time comes that we could expand the facility by yet another third and be well over 100,000 square foot facility should we need to do that. But we can do that without interrupting operations. Sure. So we've been working with our design team and been able to do this. In fact, actually gone through a process like that before, and it worked exceptionally well. And so we're hoping we have the opportunity to do that again here in the very near future.
Yeah, having been through this with my previous company, going from what was we started off in a shopping mall, and the expansion was through various stores as they went out of business or we took over their space. We then moved to a purpose-built facility, and that it's a real shot in the arm to all the employees that you've got. This building that is built to help you be more effective. It's just tremendous. So really excited about this, coming into play.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, we're just not only the footprint, as John said, the efficiencies will go through the roof, and we're just excited we'll be able to bring on new platforms and everything. What came to mind here, John, was this is John Bucksath. I don't know if you recall, early on in my time at KCAS, I came to visit you out in Columbia, and I remember walking into the building with the previous CEO and thinking, holy smokes, look at this place. It looks like a palace. So I'm so excited to see what our new building looks like, because I know you've gone through it, and through your leadership, it'll be a smooth transition. In my experience with some of these, they've been bumpy, but I think John and the rest of the executive team, we're going to rock it. Shouldn't be a problem. But that's it, John, for our agenda topics. Any closing parting words? Any last thoughts? We're kind of running out of time, so we're not going to put you on the hot seat.
I do have one more question, actually, John. In terms of, we got the new facility, do you see any new technologies that you're interested in introducing, or that you may think we may employ several years down the road? I mean, obviously we got such a big focus on the ligand binding and LCMS. Do you think there's things that are complementary to that would be a good addition?
Yes, John, I do. Obviously, some of the areas I think that are natural next steps are high-res mass spec, which I think we'll be seeing that much sooner than we were anticipating. And then, of course, the technologies that go along with the cell and gene therapy, ELISpot, next-gen sequencing, all those aspects that really to do it well, those are in our very immediate future. So, I didn't mention earlier that, too, we're also be looking for opportunities from the acquisition standpoint to support and complement our offering, and also expand our reach, probably, hopefully, most likely over into the EU here within the next, say, 12 to 18 months. So we're hearing more and more from our clients that would be desirable and really make their lives easier, and that's on the mix as well.
Yeah, that's exciting, John. Trust me, I got a list of other platforms when we get those. The list is long.
That's never been a problem with this team, right? There's always the next greatest thing.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. With bioanalysts, we're all looking for the next shiny new toy that we want to employ. We all have a shopping list.
We hide behind innovation, we call that, right? Oh, we need innovation. No, John, thank you so much for taking the time here today. Do we have time to do the hot seat? I kind of feel like we're maybe up against it. Maybe we'll just do one question. Or what do you think, guys?
I think we've done it before. We could just really talk weekend plans and things.
Yeah. John Bucksath, what are you doing this weekend?
What am I doing this weekend? Well, at this point in time, to really bore you to tears, I 4 years ago I bought an electric battery powered mower and thought it was great, and Basically, I've wore the wheels off, and I'm trying to locate a place that will actually have replacement parts for this particular wheel. And what I'm finding out, this has been quite an adventure at this point in time. And I finally got online, and there's actually forums complaining about this very issue. So now I've realized that while the grass is growing rather quickly, I'm going to have to figure out something in between with the broken wheel to make it work so I can mow my lawn. And my wife is quickly saying that, oh, honey, let's just call somebody to do it. But she doesn't realize how stubborn I am. So it's kind of a game between her and I right now. But right now, she's odds-on favorite.
You crack me up, John. $36, you get your mow lawn. No, just kidding.
That's the problem that we're up against, though. It's like there's so much, society's so much more inclined just to throw things away when they break rather than fix them. I think that's where you run into this with something that's a bit older. Replacement parts can be a nightmare.
So that I couldn't be. I agree. I like John Bucksath. You're right. Like, where everybody's too quick, you tried to fix it. And that's sort of I kind of got a similar nature, I think. Although I do let someone mow my lawn for me, John. But I had a projector go out on me, and I've been trying to. And I'm not a big, mechanical guy. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous. It's not my passion. I'm not a handyman or got a wood shop or anything. But I have spent a few hours late into the evening trying to fix a projector with no luck. I bought a new bulb for it, and I got to a point where it was basically the machine it's about 4 years old, and it's time to move on. But anyhow, John, thanks for sharing that. I think it's great that you're out there. I know a lot of people that are in a similar situation where there's something about wanting to mow one's own lawn that I got over a long time ago. But
yes.
I see it as a combination of exercise and therapy, and
I think it's funny. I'll go run 5 miles or 3 miles. I'll run a 5K. Same thing, right? It's just all time and effort, right? But it's almost funny. But so with that, I do have I got some feedback I'd like to share. We had our groundbreaking ceremony, and I feel like we officially have a couple super fans, and one of them is Judy Frankovic, and she got the opportunity. I want to give a big shout out to Judy. She gave John and I some praise for our podcast. She's a listener, and Judy, I just want to say thanks for sharing. It was great to speak with you again, and enjoyed our conversation, and thanks for being such an avid listener. And then I've got one more. Mary is a fan as well, and she reached out to me and said she really enjoyed our podcast number 39. So just a little bit of feedback for everybody in terms of what's going on with our audience. So thank you all for your feedback.
So just as we move to wrap up, any plan? Do you have any plans this weekend?
Mine are lacrosse fields. So
okay.
My son is wrapping up his lacrosse season. I think they're a game under 500 now. It's been a decent year. He's really progressed a lot. He's a freshman. He actually got on the field for some varsity time in a game this week, and so we got a game Friday night, and then the JV tournament is Saturday. So that could be maybe a couple 3 games, which is quite a bit of time. But anyhow, we're excited about that. That'll take up the lion's share. Of course, Grandma and Grandpa came in from Omaha to watch him play, so they're very excited. They'll be with us. I'm sure no big plans to eat anything, John, or cook anything, which is unfortunate. I made my best ribs recently, but I haven't gotten my uni grill out just yet because I haven't quite found the right weather. It's the days that have been warm have been so windy, and I fear that I'm gonna. I don't want to disappoint myself with my first pizza and that thing. But I do feel like that may happen on Sunday. We'll see. But that's it. I don't have nothing. It's a lot of family time.
Well, I hope we all here in the will celebrate Mother's Day. That's coming up this week.
Oh, sorry. Oh, how could I forget that?
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so thank you.
We're actually, I should say, my wife won't listen, but my son and I are making Mother's Day gifts, which is a little not unusual for us. We do it periodically, but we got some fun stuff we're gonna make like some dish towels with fruit that you cut and you dip it in some paint, and you can do that. And then we're making some cards and some poems and things like that. So we're getting a little bit, my art side's come out lately with all my puzzle making, I guess. But that I do. John, thanks for bringing that up. And of course, we have a big Sunday brunch, so there'll be no making of pizza. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't going to get my grill out this week, but do have Mother's Day plans, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers listening.
Yeah, I didn't even know, so I'm going to be in deep trouble if I don't do something quick.
Now Mom was very impressed. We went to the art store last week. She doesn't know what we're doing, but she knows she's just buying something's easy. This is going to be fun for us. So.
Yeah, so here the weather forecast isn't great. So we were looking at the backyard. I'm not sure if that will happen or not, but it's a relatively quiet weekend here. So, but now obviously I need to nudge my kids to do something for Mother's Day.
Hey John, you know what the best thing is? Hit a Sam's Club or a Costco the day before, and the roses are much cheaper. That's I buy them the day before, and I hide them in the house in a little dock area I got in some water.
So just very quickly, the big excitement here is we had a Trader Joe's open up a month or two ago, and I held off going simply because it'd be crowded, and also because I wanted to wait till I was vaccinated. But I've been there a couple of times, and it's just the range of food they have is just different enough from what you get in the typical supermarkets that it's really fun to go and shop. So I keep going there and coming back with all this stuff for everyone to try. So I went there last weekend, so I will probably try and avoid it this weekend. But
I can't say, sorry, it is exciting to go to places like Trader Joe's, and you triggered one more. Last weekend I went down to our river market, which is like a downtown area on the river, obviously, with like, I don't know, probably like 70 shops that are kind of outside, and that's I guess my Trader Joe's. But that was a fun trip last week.
And on that note, I think we're probably done for this week, aren't we? So again, thank you very much, John, for joining us. It was a real pleasure, and it's always great to have you come and join us. Anything to add, Dominic?
No. Again, John, thanks for joining us, and really enjoyed it. And what a great podcast number 40. That's historical too.